But with these models, I can just like generate a ton of different card arts that resemble the names. Nope, basically unlimited commercial use. They have a license on their website. The explanations need to be understandable. Yeah, but that's the easy part. It's not hard to have a grammar to explain the cards. What is hard is making them visually distinct. Can I make channel emotes? You could try. Reading the card explains the card. Yeah, but you don't have to read the card every time you draw the card. You should be able to tell at a glance what card you have, what it does. Do this correctly for the first time ever. Like, even if the art doesn't perfectly represent what the card's name is or what the card does, as long as there's something there that you can hook into and know what you have, just goes a long way to making, like, reducing the mental load of trying to figure out what your hand is, what your action space is. Comes with repetition? I don't think it does. It does if you have visuals. But, like, if you just have cards with piles of text on them, I don't think any amount of repetition is really gonna reduce that mental load as much as having visuals. Well, it's kind of a thing in a roguelike, right? Because you have similar cards for the whole run, but... But I think procedural generated cards opens up a lot of possibilities for a roguelike that I'm pretty excited about. A lot of design space that isn't really possible gets opened up. It smells so sad. It's also a lot easier to scale a single-player game to a number of users where I'm comfortable selling the game on Steam than a multiplayer card game. But I think the idea is interesting in both concepts. It's just a lot simpler to get a roguelike to market. Procedurally generated mean? Think like, if you're familiar with Diablo, think like Diablo items. But if you want to think of it purely in terms of like card games, Wizards Familiar has a trigger when you cast a spell, it gains a number of stats. All of those different aspects can be split up and distributed. You can have different types of triggers, different actions when those triggers are met, different magnitudes of those actions. So instead of like 2-2, think maybe it's 3-3. Those magnitudes don't necessarily have to be constant either. It can be based on like how many cards you have in hand, how many cards are in your deck, your stats. I guess we just fill our board. No, I'm not talking about Storybook Randomizer, the game that I'm working on. Yeah, that would be a way to do it. The system that I'm going for is way more convoluted than that, but that's the core idea. But that's also the nice thing about the generation. Like, it can be as convoluted as you want. The important thing is you're generating a big variety rather than that the system is understandable by the user. Yeah, balance is important to a degree. Having like a mana system or pseudo mana system does make it a little bit easier. You get a lot more numbers that you can tune. different effects, abilities, and magnitudes and triggers all have different multipliers and costs associated with them. You just have to understand the process, they don't understand the card. Exactly, exactly. Like, getting the grammar right is something that is important, but it does not have to be simple to generate that grammar. Provisions? No, it's definitely mana. Provisions don't work at all. After playing Gwent for a couple years, I think provisions were not very good at solving the problem that they go out to solve. And especially in a context like this, I don't think they make any sense. I have the ability, like the card system is the same system that's going to be used by the enemies. So I have the ability to hand edit cards, but I'm pretty much only doing that for enemies and bosses. No, I'm not yelling at you. Just, I think there are a lot of flaws with provisions. It's kind of hard to get them to make sense in the context of a roguelike too, because you want to be able to keep adding cards to your deck. Yeah, like, it only really matters on cards that you're playing for value rather than synergy-based stuff. Like, provisions don't do anything to balance synergies. I shouldn't say they do nothing. They do very, very little. But, like, when synergies get out of control, you're still going to play them regardless of how you tune the provisions knob. Every cost of flow. Well, you don't need to do that if your numbers are big enough, as long as you have the granularity. Yeah, yeah. And on the lower end of things, like, a 1 provision nerf is huge. Like, nerfing something from 4 to 5 provisions often just makes it unplayable. Nerfing top end stuff usually does very little. It's like only that middle range of provision counts that the tweaks do anything. You see attack increments of about 100, sometimes 50, but rarely. But if you divided every Yu-Gi-Oh card by 100, it wouldn't make much of a difference. You would still get integers for the most part. What are we doing this game? Apparently it is 4.1. Hey, glad you're enjoying the YouTube content. Not the best. Wait, but I want that one. Medusa. It has 4 power. It's kind of shit. I guess with double Queen of Hearts, I should just play the Ela unit even if it's shit. This game we're talking about, yeah. My game that may or may not ever get to a demo version. It's like 6 gold for a pretty good kiss. Dusa is a monster. You balance cool card effects? What do you mean? Level 5 already? Where is this game gone? Talking with chat to pass the time. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the hope is the system generates cool enough card effects that you don't need to hand generate any cards to specifically make interesting effects, but I mean, that's still technically in the air. Maybe there'll be some event cards. I mean, that's easy. So there's a trigger component that triggers when a card is summoned. And then that trigger has the action that grants 1/1. I get a buff from my Medusa. Really don't want to play this 3/3. I guess I can play the 0/0 apple tree here. Balancing? The balancing. I think you're worried way too much about balancing. Oh, right. Pay free. Like, the balancing is just like a chain of multipliers. Where the action has a base cost, which then gets adjusted by how much, like what magnitude is associated with the action. And then the trigger has a multiplier as well. Yeah, like balance, especially in a roguelike, is really tertiary to just having a fun game. Like, is anything in Slay the Spire balanced? Does anyone care? Yeah, the enemy design is going to be difficult for sure. Getting that experience right is going to be tricky. I'm just going to set up for Bearstein. Still could Pumpkin. I don't know. Components that can get slotted together into custom cards. Yeah, I'm going more for the Recombinator approach. If you've been playing Path of Exile this season, so you take cards and combine them. I'm not sure how the UI would work with the Noita idea. That seems a little convoluted to the user. This is the greatest scam comp that has ever been. Move aside, mirror, mirror, scam. We've got triple Dusa in the backline. Yeah, that's generally true as well, new plan. What's important is there isn't, like, one dominant strategy. Oh, did I skip a Bearstein? I probably wanted the Bearstein. I just missed the Bearstein. I was tunneled on Pumpkin. To be fair, I don't know if Bearstein's good on this board. I think we are at the point where we are a Pumpkin comp. see the same deck everywhere. I don't know if 52% is all that concerning. It's also a bit misleading because play rate matters so much when you're looking at win rates of decks. Like a deck that has a small percentage played in the field but an 80% win rate across the field is going to feel less annoying than a deck that is 80% of the field with a 50% win rate against the field. At least until the meta stabilizes and people either play the 80% deck or find ways to counter the 80% win rate deck. People often try to boil down balance into like single numbers. It doesn't really work. Not dreaming. No. Happy with 9-9. Play the spell! That was the wrong target. Exactly. And just because a deck has a very high win rate at one point in time does not mean as people play the game more and develop strategies that it will continue to have that win rate indefinitely. Yeah, like there are components of balance for sure that determine how fun a game can be, but balance itself isn't really the end goal ever. I don't know, I guess I just cut this. And so when my apple tree attacks, I'm not as sad. I held my crafty since level 2, maybe. I've had it for a while. Like, generally, balance is as important as there isn't one dominant strategy that you play against constantly. Because variety is an important component of fun, generally. That said, that is not always true. Like, a lot of the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Formats have been ones that are dominated by one or two decks, because that single matchup is very fun to play. We top 2'd this game with Pumpkinless Pumpkin. Yeah, that was a huge problem in early Homecoming Gwen. Like, technically all the factions were viable, but all the factions played exactly the same. Yu-Gi-Oh's heading into a 2-deck meta next set. Look, I didn't say all 2-deck metas were good. But historically, there have been some Yu-Gi-Oh! Formats with variety that have been absolute dog shit. And there have been some Yu-Gi-Oh! Formats with 1 or 2 dominant decks that have been some of the best formats of all time. Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh's the only game that I think I can point to that has had formats that the community generally agrees are good, while not having a ton of variety. Dragon Ruler Spellbook is one of the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Formats of all time, if not the best. At least modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game that is incredibly complex, and sometimes manages to use that complexity for good. Can I get a pumpkin? Thanks. He'll attack it, Copium. I guess I can sell for it. Do I even really want it? It's good if it upgrades. I can't get out of the Monkey Paw because then my deuces are bad. Let's try to find a combat spell, probably. Chess doesn't have starting variety, but different openings can play very differently. Instead of chess's variety coming from the start state, it comes from the large game tree. Darn. Super dead.